So let's look at this last video on Trump from the perspective of Kafka and the question of whether. So let's look at it's even capital at the chapter 7, where this Titorelli is bringing up the question of the scheinbare Freisprechen, or the apparent, but we have the word shine, so it's like the shining is sudden. Is something suddenly shines forward, it flashes forward. You're not quite sure that it's true. It's scheinbare Freisprechen, where the word frei is free and the word sprechen is to speak. So it's a word that frees the prisoner. The acquittal is spoken, but it's just sort of flashes up, it shines up. Let's superimpose that over the situation to give it its a direct sense. So there's a struggle in the sense that, okay, there's been Trump's been ruled against in the lower courts, but that's sort of just like an apparent strike down. It's because it still has to be reviewed by the court, by SCOTUS. So, and then we know that Trump has a preponderance of allies in SCOTUS because in general the conservative justices are on his side, and perhaps also for a variety of reasons, including that they like the theory that John Yoo has propounded amongst others. I know John Yoo personally, I might boast, or at least I have if not an elbow rubbing acquaintance, bear nodding acquaintance perhaps, or he said hello to me. But in any case, there might be some favors to this primary executive theory, or however it's said. But I think that just leads us to the view that there's a collapse of the separation of powers. It doesn't necessarily, as it were, take us beyond all laws. So Agamben is saying we should read Kafka as the one who shows this is what it's like when you realize that the law doesn't exist. So that would mean that we'd realize what Spinoza is saying is sort of just romantical, because it's sort of like, yes, you're waiting forever for this law which has fallen into obeisance to reassert itself. The forces of the abiding and strict and malevolent power of the old law will reassert itself at some point. So but we don't know that it's fallen out of usage yet, or whether it was ever in usage. But so one test of that would be something along the lines of, say that the court then reverses these tariff laws and says, okay, Trump can do whatever he wants. He can declare, he can make an emergency mean whatever he wants. You can say it's about economics. You can say it's about health. You can say it's about safety. You can say it's about anything. At a certain point, wouldn't we say it's true the court still exists, but like, say it made that decision, then you'd kind of feel like even though the Solicitor General still exists, we know that almost all of more than 1,000 lawyers have been swapped out of the executive branch, but just a couple that are reasonably competent according to the old style of prowess, of legal prowess, still exist, or legal proficiency, let's say. The current Solicitor General has normal legal proficiency, in contradistinction to all the lawyers Trump has brought in. Maybe Pam Bondi is like their queen or something, but is she really? I think she would not be able to speak before SCOTUS. She'd just be laughed out. She may be good at what she's good at, I'm not denying that. At some kind of low, nasty lawfare, which of course maybe it constitutes a large proportion of actual legal doings, which is the reason that many of the lawyers in practice are simultaneously caught between the idealism and the desire not to be considered naive. But we could see, certainly in SCOTUS, you see cases argued at at a level that jurists, although they always take issue with things, for the most part agree is a high level. Yes, you get certain decisions where even our best jurists don't think we're at a high level anymore. But on the whole, it's much different than what Pam Bondi's doing, what the Solicitor General is capable of doing. At least he's capable of arguing according to those standards, in the sense that academic standards in a certain department on how to do your bibliography when you write history must be matched. Otherwise, people will say this person doesn't belong in the profession. There's a standard, and none of the other lawyers could really do it, except a few that have to interact with the court, including the Solicitor General. He's one of the last ones left. But if this Rubicon, or this magical Zauberpunkt were pierced, the piercing power to do that existed, then in one sense it would say maybe it's like it turns out that the sovereign power, the Hobbesian power, was actually always in play, and the law never actually existed. Of course, then you could try to say, because of course there's lots of countries where we, observing them from afar, we say, is Erdogan really ever going to step down, or is it just that they say he stands for office, like with Putin, like with Xi, and probably like with Modi. I don't know about in the case of Modi, whether Modi will actually have to stand for election again. But you can see this kind of case. I mean, I think this is the good moment for Vance to come in, because I think the proficiency of a rich person who's learned how to game his particular defects with the fact of being rich and having lackeys around him and desperate dependents around him, can do quite a bit. But is it good? Is it pax? Is it peace? Is victory or making money, is as much as people may like Atlantic City and the Trump Tower. I've been to the Trump Tower. It's impressive. There's a waterfall in the lobby. There's Lux shops on the second floor. It's very nice. But is this really good for the country? And on the other hand, is even if one could say, I don't think it's true, because I think Trump would have made more money if he had just sat on what he got from his father. But if it's true that he has made money and crime is paid, so crime pays. That's not a new story. We know that crime pays. But is it good that crime pays? No, the crime should be abolished. It should be abolished. So that, in this sense, we should have something that's good, that gains and grows the culture and the polis and the political community, rather than the guy that's good at winning, in the sense of winning at business. This is the kind of winning that should probably be abolished. But okay, say it does win. This, at the same time, I want to look at from the point of view of how much can we say this helps us to understand what Kafka means, for instance, by the Scheinbare Freischussen. that's not the way it's not. I want to say Freischrecken, but how does the word? But anyway, the ostensible acquittal, or the as it were, suddenly shining up word or referee that's put it into its exercises, that this man is acquitted, and it's the truth. Maybe there's not such a truth. Maybe it's always that the question of anything laid down, the positive law, is always somehow an apparatus or a castle in the service of the prince. But the question here is really this: it's, do we want to keep arguing back and forth, like how much are the courts really exist? 'Cause obviously the SCOTUS would still be there if it took that decision to uphold Trump's tariffs, and thereby in a certain way demonstrated that there are part of what is most commonly called rule by law rather than rule of law. I know there's a lot of tricky questions to that, because maybe you could say that the jurists aren't kowtowing to Trump, but rather this is how they think, because you point to people like John Yoo, as they mentioned, or maybe, I don't know, I don't think Richard Epstein agrees with the unitary executive, but it gets into a situation where you wonder how much then are the influence of, how much are these people influenced by themselves, by their political direction. But then you could say they're influenced that way because that's the truth, and they're upholding the truth. There's all kinds of ways. So there's all kinds of ways we could uphold the notion that even though the law is in constant fluctuation, and even though there's a constant contest both between the jurists and in the political sphere over the nature of the law, nonetheless we could keep insisting that there's at bottom a law that a non-romantical law that merely needs to be brought into existence, merely needs to be established somehow, or whether Kafka is somehow showing us that we don't have to analyze things from the point of view of this sort of this fixation on this Zuhandan expectation of certain things. I think a strong evidence for Kafka's view we can get when we look at China, when we look at the so-called galactic civilization of China, as Alan McFarlane has called it, because they do not have, and Kissinger has made this point as well, the view of the Chinese that there's a problem, there'll always be another problem, and the view also brought out by the great sinologist, China expert Needham, concerning the rejection of the science of generality, or the Überhaupt, the sort of Kantian Überhaupt, or generalizing notion of a totality, which corresponds to a saying that, by the way, we should remember that Kant didn't actually, he talks about the Sein as a copula in the sentence and all that, which means, yes, being according to Kant is not a Wirklichkeit, it's not a real reality, it's not a Wirklich begriff, or a Wirklich, it's not real. Being is not a real concept, but according to Kant, there's something else. They're logical concepts. So that Kant is actually, despite what we often hear, Kant is actually upholding the notion of being as logical, which means that it belongs to the word. But the word is the logos, and then we can see again, this brings us back into the laying down as the positing, as the speaking of the law as the things. It's the thing said. It's the nomos, right? The nomoi is Plato, and so on. So that Kant is actually propounding both this ideal out of the word, which he then says that the word our discussion allows us to gain out of the maxim. That's Kant's way of getting to it, whereas Hegel says, no, we're not going to get to it out of the maxim in the Aristotelian way, as it were. It's in the Kantian way. I shouldn't say in Aristotle. Aristotle is so think so much about the history of experience in the sense of the community has made an experience, and then we, the thinkers, can learn from that. Whereas Kant is just saying you can know these things directly from deducing them by saying things like one cannot make an exception to a rule, therefore one can never lie. Something like that, which doesn't make sense in practice because of the authoritarian at the door saying obey. You could argue later, after we put these dangerous insurgents to death, but for now you must hearken. You must hearken. So does Kafka, so I guess that's the ending question, does Kafka actually show us another way to look at it, which isn't focused on this juxtaposition between what we get from speech and what we learn from the experience of a sovereign that, as it were, breaks through the spider web of all the laws and proves that the law doesn't exist? But is this really is even this life experience a proof of the truth, or how does this proof of the truth ever come to be known?